Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're tuning in right now, you are undoubtedly seeing the breaking news that is, well, just dominating every single screen and feed today.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
The United States and Israel have launched coordinated strikes on Iran. Explosions have been reported across multiple locations, and retaliation is already actively underway. It is a highly volatile, really fast-moving situation.
The sheer volume of tactical information coming out minute by minute it's staggering.
Yeah.
And it's reshaping the geopolitical landscape in real time.
Right. And because we are looking at an actively unfolding, highly charged geopolitical conflict today, we are setting a very specific boundary for this conversation.
Absolutely.
We aren't here to debate the politics. We're not endorsing any military strategy or taking any kind of ideological side. Our mission today is strictly analytical. We are stepping back from the chaotic military headlines and looking exclusively at the data from our source material today, which is a comprehensive brief titled The Economic Anatomy of Conflict with Iran. The goal here for you, the listener, is to unpack the mechanics of what is actually happening underneath those headlines purely by the numbers.
And that structural approach is crucial right now. The core thesis of the material we're analyzing is that the events you are watching unfold on the news, they don't represent just a military conflict.
Right. It's bigger than that.
Exactly. What you are seeing is the violent expression of a structural economic story, that has been compounding in the background for decades.
Decades, yeah.
When military action occurs in regions that sit at the absolute center of global energy trade, the battlefield is never only geographic.
No.
The underlying battlefield, the one that ultimately dictates national resilience and global fallout, is financial.
Okay, let's unpack this. The source points us directly to the geography of money, and right now that means the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
We all know it's a vital waterway, but the data in the brief puts the sheer scale of it into a really harsh perspective. This single narrow choke point carries roughly 20% of global seaborne oil.
20%.
1/5 of the oil moving across the world's oceans has to transit through this one specific corridor.
Which means the global markets do not have the luxury of waiting for a missile to physically strike a tanker before they react.
Right, they can't wait.
The risk of disruption to that 20% is priced in immediately. The source details this highly sensitive domino effect that triggers the very moment military forces mobilize in that region.
And it happens fast.
Instantly. First, you see an instant jump in crude oil futures. Traders are locking in prices now against the threat of scarcity tomorrow.
And that immediate jump in futures triggers the next domino, which is marine insurance.
Yes.
Underwriters looking at the Persian Gulf instantly recalculate the risk of moving cargo through a live conflict zone.
Right.
Those insurance costs just skyrocket, which then forces standard shipping premiums to increase across the board.
Exactly.
Suddenly, the physical cost of moving a container of goods, any goods, not just oil, from point A to point B is vastly more expensive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see how the stability of global energy flows is inextricably tied to virtually everything you interact with.
Everyday stuff.
Yeah. When shipping premiums jump, that cost is passed down the supply chain. It shifts global inflation expectations almost overnight.
Wow.
We are talking about the baseline consumer prices you see at the grocery store, the cost of manufacturing inputs, and the volatility within worldwide financial markets that directly affect your retirement accounts.
It's all connected.
The immediate market reaction itself is empirical evidence. It demonstrates that military maneuvers in this specific region pull levers that hold extraordinary global economic weight.
It's really the speed of it that stands out to me. The physical realities of supply and demand haven't even changed yet on day one of a conflict, but the financial architecture has already shifted global pricing.
Right.
But, our source material challenges us to look deeper than just this immediate shockwave. We are diving into a 2026 academic study by economist Spruk. It's titled Confrontation with the West and Long-Run Economic and Institutional Outcomes. Evidence from Iran.
It is a rigorously researched piece because it isolates the variables of geopolitics from the noise of standard economic cycles.
Yeah.
The study essentially asks a very specific, measurable question. What would the economic landscape actually look like today if decades of sustained geopolitical confrontation had never taken place?
To answer that, Spruk relies on a statistical methodology called synthetic controls.
Right.
Which, to put it simply for you listening, is kind of like building an alternate version or a parallel universe.
That's a great way to put it.
Rather than just comparing the country's current economy to its past, The researchers take the economic DNA of similar nations that didn't face massive sanctions or sustain geopolitical tension.
Right, they blend them.
Exactly. They blend these data points together to create a statistical baseline, essentially a highly accurate counterfactual model of what a normal growth trajectory should have looked like without the friction of constant confrontation.
By placing that counterfactual trajectory right next to the actual historical data, the study reveals the hidden long-term costs of a localized Cold War.
It strips away all the political rhetoric.
Completely. And it leaves you with a stark, measurable gap between what is and what should have been.
But wait, isn't it notoriously difficult to separate the economic damage of direct Western sanctions from the damage caused by just, general internal mismanagement or poor domestic policy?
Yes.
Like, how does Spruk's model account for a government that might just be misallocating its own resources?
That is exactly why the synthetic control method is so vital here. By constructing that baseline from a weighted blend of similar economies, many of which have their own varying degrees of internal mismanagement, the model effectively controls for baseline domestic policy errors.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the massive divergence you see in the data isn't just the result of standard bureaucratic inefficiency. It is the specific, quantifiable drag of geopolitical isolation.
Let's get into those specific numbers because the study breaks this economic drag down into 4 measurable pillars.
Let's do it.
First, we look at GDP per capita. The synthetic model shows that the gap between the actual economic output per person and the counterfactual baseline isn't just a slight dip, it is a chasm.
It's huge.
We are looking at a persistently, structurally lower GDP over decades, not just during temporary crises or sanction spikes.
What's fascinating here is the permanence of that gap.
Right.
Often when you look at the economic impact of a specific crisis, say a sudden embargo or a localized conflict, you see a sharp drop in GDP followed by a recovery period.
They bounce back.
The economy eventually returns to its baseline trend. But Spruk's data shows that sustained confrontation permanently lowers the baseline itself.
Wow.
The growth curve flattens out. It represents hundreds of billions in lost economic potential, permanently erased from the national ledger.
Which brings us to the second pillar, foreign direct investment or FDI.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Looking at the metrics, Spruk's synthetic model reveals a severe and sustained capital flight. The actual FDI entering the country is a fraction of what the counterfactual model projects.
A tiny fraction.
The persistent confrontation premium essentially walled the country off from global capital.
And the implications of that lost FDI go far beyond just a lack of funding.
How so?
When international companies bypass a country due to geopolitical risk, that country doesn't just lose money, it loses the vital transfer of modern technology. It loses the integration of advanced management practices. Without that constant influx of foreign direct investment, domestic industries are forced to operate with aging infrastructure.
I get left behind.
The entire modernization process of the nation's industrial base is essentially frozen in time.
You can see how that lack of modernization bleeds directly into the third major finding of the study, which is trade integration.
Exactly.
The data visibly demonstrates that the country's integration into the broader global trade network is significantly weaker than its counterfactual path. They have been systematically decoupled from the complex economic web of international supply chains.
When you are cut off from those integrated trade networks, everything becomes exponentially more expensive and less efficient to produce domestically.
Right.
You lose the economies of scale that come with participating in a globalized market.
Makes sense.
The friction of simply trying to import basic industrial components or export finished goods becomes a massive tax on every single transaction the country attempts to make.
And that structural friction highlights the fourth and final data point in Spruk's analysis, non-oil exports.
Yes.
Obviously, we are talking about a region heavily dominant in energy production, but the hallmark of a healthy, maturing economy is diversification.
Right. You want to branch out.
You use the capital generated from oil to build out other sectors. Yet the research shows that non-oil exports have been severely suppressed compared to the synthetic baseline.
The drop in non-oil exports is perhaps the most revealing metric of the four. It shows how isolation actively starves domestic innovation. Without the competitive pressure of integrated global trade, and without the technological boost of foreign direct investment, local manufacturing just gets stuck.
They can't evolve.
The broader economic development is bottlenecked, leaving the nation dangerously reliant on a single, highly volatile commodity to keep its entire financial system afloat.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you synthesize all four of these pillars, the permanently lower GDP per capita, the severe lack of foreign direct investment, the decoupled trade integration, and the stifled non-oil exports, you uncover the most critical insight of this entire analysis.
The compounding effect.
Yes, the cost of sustained geopolitical conflict is not a static penalty, it compounds.
The compounding nature of this economic drag is the ultimate takeaway here.
Yeah.
Think of an economy as an incredibly complex piece of machinery. Sustained confrontation acts as friction inside the gears.
Right.
Year 1, the friction slows the machine down slightly. But by year 10, the lack of maintenance, the lack of new parts, and the constant grinding wear down the fundamental
And
component.
it builds up.
The economic damage builds upon itself, layer by layer, year after year, fundamentally eroding the institutional strength of the nation from the inside out.
It is like ignoring a small, steady leak in the roof of your house.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
It doesn't cause the house to collapse on day 1 or even in year 5. But over a period of decades, that constant intrusion of water rots the wooden framing.
Right.
The structural integrity of the entire building is compromised, even if it still looks somewhat normal from the outside.
That analogy perfectly captures the danger of compounding economic costs. Because the real crisis doesn't happen during the decades of slow rot.
No.
The crisis happens when that weakened structure is suddenly forced to withstand a massive external pressure.
So what does this all mean? How do we take decades of statistical modeling and compounding economic drag and apply it to the breaking news of coordinated military strikes happening right now?
It means that the economy absorbing these strikes today is fundamentally different from the economy that could have existed without decades of confrontation.
The alternate universe.
Exactly. When an economy has been structurally hollowed out, when its GDP is suppressed, its infrastructure is aging from a lack of FDI, and it relies heavily on a single export. Its capacity to absorb a massive, immediate shock, like an act of war, drastically declines.
Going back to the roof leak analogy, it's the difference between a structurally sound house weathering a hurricane versus a house with decades of internal rot facing that exact same storm.
Precise.
The weakened structure is exponentially more likely to suffer a catastrophic collapse. The underlying fragility is already there, baked into the numbers long before the first sirens ever go off.
Spruk's research provides the empirical proof that long-term confrontation destroys economic resilience.
Yeah.
And when that resilience is gone, the nation's ability to withstand sudden violent shocks is severely compromised. It drastically narrows the strategic options available to the leadership.
Because the money just isn't there.
Right. The financial foundation required to sustain a prolonged conflict simply isn't there.
It changes the entire lens through which you view today's headlines.
It really does.
To truly comprehend the scope of the war happening right now, you have to force yourself to look past the tactical military maps. You have to follow the widening GDP gaps. You have to trace the missing investment flows and the diminished trade volumes. Because beneath every single missile strike we are seeing reported today, there is a complex, deeply rooted economic calculation.
Once you understand the profound economic anatomy of the conflict, the invisible forces driving the geopolitical decisions suddenly become visible.
Yeah.
The strategic maneuvers aren't just about territory. They're about leveraging or exposing those compounding structural weaknesses.
Let's quickly summarize the ground we've covered today. We started with the immediate shockwave of today's breaking news, tracking how the mere threat of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz instantly rewrites global shipping premiums and oil futures.
Right.
From there, we dove into the statistical rigor of Spruk's research, using synthetic controls to isolate the profound compounding damage of decades of geopolitical isolation.
The parallel universe model.
Exactly. We saw how the persistent drag on GDP, foreign investment, and trade integration slowly rots the economic foundation, leaving a nation highly vulnerable to the sudden shock of active conflict.
And the reason this data matters so directly to you, the listener, is because geopolitics is not an isolated academic exercise.
Not at all.
It is the defining architecture that dictates the invisible price tags on the global supply chains powering your daily life.
Yep.
When historical economic rot suddenly collides with an active military conflict halfway across the world, it actively changes the math on the cost of your groceries, the fuel in your car, and the overarching stability of the global markets you rely on.
It is entirely interconnected, driven by these underlying measurable economic realities that rarely make the front page.
This raises an important question, something critical to consider as you watch the fallout from today's events.
What's that?
Well, our source material makes it abundantly clear that global markets price in the risk of conflict immediately. We see marine insurance costs and inflation expectations shift instantly just at the threat of escalation, often before a single piece of infrastructure is actually damaged.
Right, the premium spike.
If the mere threat of conflict instantly triggers such tangible, widespread economic costs, you have to ask yourself a bigger question.
Okay.
How much of our everyday baseline global economy is actually just an invisible insurance premium that we are already paying?
Oh, wow.
How much of the baseline cost of living around the entire world is essentially a hidden tax, silently paid by consumers to account for future geopolitical conflicts that hadn't even started yet?
An invisible insurance premium baked into the entire global economy. That's a heavy thought.
It really puts things in perspective.
To our listener, keep chewing on that question as you navigate the news cycle today. Keep looking for the hidden numbers and the compounding structural realities behind the loud headlines. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the economic anatomy of conflict. Stay curious.